this. Good afternoon. This hearing of the Tom Lantos Commission, North Korean Human Rights Movement, Current Prospects and Obstacles, will come to order. And good afternoon to everyone, and I thank you for joining us today. Above all, to Dr. Tara O and Suzanne Scholte. Suzanne has been a tremendous asset to this commission, to the Foreign Affairs Committee, to my subcommittees over the course of decades. And I want to thank her for her extraordinary work on bearing truth to power, especially as it relates to North Korea and South Korea. She's been a force for the world, and I want to thank her for that extraordinary leadership. Something important is happening in North Korea, and this despite the outward appearance of an overwhelmingly controlled society suffering under what might well be called the most repressive government in the entire world. The government of North Korea continues to operate as it has for many decades, an unimaginably horrific system of repression, including the pervasive use of torture, denying its citizens every basic freedom of expression, religion, and movement. Above all, it is focused on denying North Koreans access to any information about or from the outside world, and it enforces those restrictions through pervasive digital and social surveillance, arbitrary detention, and a vast system of penal labor camps. And that system of control has only tightened in recent years, particularly by reducing citizens' exposure to outside information and reinforcing ideological discipline. But even within that closed system, we are reminded today of a critical truth. Some information, some ideas from the outside world can always get through, and it does. And all of our government's efforts to suppress it makes it more precious and much more powerful. It has long been and continues to be our government's policy to help get as much information, news, ideas, truth through to the people of North Korea as possible. Some of the North Korean defectors who are with us today in the hearing room have experienced the transforming power of ideas firsthand. In a written submission to the commission, one defector leader explains that when North Koreans come to understand their, quote, God-given rights, everything changes. Another defector now leading a broadcasting effort recounts that listening to a forbidden radio signal as a child was, quote, the first window through which I encountered freedom and hope. And as that same testimony makes unmistakably clear, some of the most powerful forces that can change North Korea is not military force, but information. Information changes people, ultimately change society. That insight should guide us, it should inspire us, and it should motivate us to do more. Information is transformative, and efforts to block it, wherever they occur, must be taken with the utmost seriousness. And that brings us to the deeply troubling actions of the government of Korea. For almost 40 years, the United States government and the Congress have considered South Korea as a model democratic ally and a partner in advancing human rights. Yet developments in the past years raise serious concerns about democratic backsliding. These concerns include the government's poor treatment of the North Korean human rights movement, but extend to the Lee government violations of core freedoms within South Korea. The Lee government has taken a series of steps that have had the effect of constraining human rights advocacy related to North Korea. And these include disbanding the Ministry of Unification's Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs Office, withholding its annual North Korean human rights report from public release, halting government-sponsored broadcasts into North Korea, and supporting legislation that allows police to block activists from sending information, such as leaflets and digital media, into North Korea. These are not minor administrative adjustments. These are actions that directly affect the ability of civil society, especially defector-led organizations, to carry out one of the most effective forms of engagement with the people of North Korea, the transmission of information. We will also hear testimony that enforced actions have gone further, targeting activists, restricting access to launch sites, increasing surveillance, and creating a chilling effect on those engaged in this vital human rights work. Suzanne Scholte describes this movement as, quote, the most challenging time in the history of the North Korean human rights movement, pointing out not only the failures of the international community, but to the fact that these efforts send information into North Korea are now being actively constrained. She relays the words of the defectors who warned that, quote, true peace cannot be achieved while turning away from the freedom and human rights of the North Korean people, and who emphasized that silencing the flow of information does not promote stability, it only strengthens repression. Dr. Tara Oh likewise raises serious concerns about the trajectory of freedom within South Korea itself, describing, quote, more and more restrictions on the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and other freedoms, warning that these measures are increasingly being codified into law. These developments deserve careful scrutiny. Policies that suppress the flow of information into North Korea or that penalize those seeking to expose the truth are not neutral acts. They have consequences, and deleterious consequences at that. They affect whether the people of North Korea hear alternative voices. They affect whether defectors can continue their vital work. And ultimately, they affect whether the cause of human rights advances or recedes. We need peace on the Korean Peninsula, but we will not deter the North by suppressing the voices of freedom in the South or by limiting fundamental freedoms. The defense of human dignity and human rights are essential to meeting the challenge of the militant North Korean dictatorship. It is in deep commitment to human rights that we find the strength and the stability to responsibly stand up to the nuclear blackmail games played by the Kim dictatorship over North Korea. Congress has acted on that principle through legislation, such as the North Korean Human Rights Act, and through sustained bipartisan engagement on this issue. The North Korean defectors play the leading role in this defense. They are the best, most credible witnesses for human dignity in what is at stake between North Korean nuclear blackmail and the free world. They are witnesses that we need to hear in Congress and in South Korea and at the White House. They are agents of change, strengthening and educating the hearts of the people of North Korea. They are why our government should help, and South Korea should help amplify their words into the North. As one defector testified, quote, what the North Korean regime fears most is outside information. I would ask unanimous consent at this point to include written statements of 5 North Korean defectors be entered into the hearing record, and without objection so ordered. They have already been distributed to members of our commission. I would point out that Mr. McGovern, our co-chair, is over at the Rules Committee right now, attending some legislative business. He is the ranking member. Hopefully he can join us. I know he wants to be here, but that's why he is not here today so far. He will be trying to come. Let me just now introduce our very distinguished witnesses. Dr. Tara Oh is a member of the Academic Council of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. She is a fellow at the Institute of Korean American Studies and the East Asia Research Center, and she previously served as the adjunct fellow at the Hudson Institute. Dr. Oh is the author of The Collapse of North Korea, Challenges, Planning, and Geopolitics of Unification. Her research focuses on South Korean politics and history, Korean contingency planning and unification, U.S. alliances in Asia, and human rights in North Korea. She is also a retired U.S. Air Force officer who served at the Pentagon, the United Nations Combined Forces Command in Korea, and the U.S. European Command. We'll then hear from the distinguished Dr. Suzanne Scholte, who is the chair of the North Korea Freedom Coalition of Free North Korea Radio and vice chairman of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. She is also president of the Defense Forum Foundation, which promotes freedom, democracy, and human rights abroad. She has worked for almost 20 years to promote freedom, human rights, and dignity of the North Korean people. And in addition to her work in support of the North Koreans, she has led efforts to support freedom and democracy in Western Sahara. Suzanne will also speak today for the 5 Korean defectors who are seated directly behind her and whose, again, statements we have received, and we are grateful for those statements. I'd like to now yield to, who should go first? Dr. Rowe, if you wouldn't begin.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission co-chairs, Congressman Chris Smith and Congressman James McGovern, the commission members and staff for this opportunity to provide testimony. I retired from the U.S. Air Force as a lieutenant colonel. Currently, briefly, I'm an academic council member of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, as well as a fellow at the Institute for Korean American Studies. I focus on the Korean Peninsula. In my earlier years, I focused on North Korea, but lately I focus on South Korea, and I'm honored to be here today. South Korea, also known as the Republic of Korea, or ROK, which was established in 1948, is an important refuge for North Korean defectors seeking freedom. The defectors from North Korea have somewhere to go. Of course, it's a very difficult journey from North Korea to South Korea, but once they arrive in South Korea, they get national identification cards. That's because they become citizens of the Republic of Korea right away. And so the whole process is automatic. This place of freedom, however, is losing its freedom. There are more and more restrictions on freedom in the Republic of Korea. Restrictions on freedom of speech and freedom of religion and other freedoms. Increasingly, the measures to suppress freedom are being codified into law, and now they're trying to change the Constitution. And who are these people who are so focused on eroding freedom in South Korea? They are pro-Chinese Communist Party, pro-CCP, pro-Korean Workers' Party, which is a communist party in North Korea. And they are also anti-Republic of Korea, anti-United States, and anti-Japan. They now control the majority of levers of power in South Korea. So today, I'll highlight 3 areas. 1, the efforts to change the Constitution of the Republic of Korea and to pull it away from a freedom-based democracy and market economy to one that is socialist-based. 2, suppression of freedom of speech. And 3, suppression of freedom of religion. As mentioned earlier, North Korean defectors, when they arrive in South Korea, they receive the ROK citizenship automatically. That's because of the Constitution of the Republic of Korea, specifically Article 3, which states that the territory of the Republic of Korea shall consist of the territory, or actually Korean Peninsula, and its adjacent islands. The Constitution is replete with references to the concept of freedom, such as free democratic basic order in Article 4. Article 20 guarantees freedom of religion. Article 21 guarantees freedom of speech, of the press, assembly, and association. But the Lee Jae-myung administration, the Democratic Party of Korea, which is DPRK, and its associated political parties are about to change the Constitution. The public is not demanding this change. It's only a small segment of the society, specifically those who are pro-CCP and pro-socialism, who want this. But the details of the changes are not available to the public. So as a reference, I go back to 2018 under the Moon Jae-in administration. And his party, the DPK, the same party, and their efforts to change the Constitution, including their efforts to delete the word freedom from the Constitution to show what they're about to do. At that time, so back in 2018, they proposed the following: delete free democracy as the basic order of the Republic of Korea and a unified Korea. Add the realization of flexible and equal democratic society. Delete free market economy. Add equal democratic society and social economy. And there are many, many more. What may sound like subtle word changes are fundamental changes to the political and economic system of the Republic of Korea. The intention is clear. All these changes show a move away from freedom-based democracy and market economy to socialism, which is about central planning and central distribution. It's about taking the choices and decision-making away from individuals and concentrating them centrally in the government. It's about eroding individual freedom. That's because the state makes all the decisions, just like in North Korea. There, the state determines where you live, where you work, whether you go to college or not, whether you can attend a family funeral in another city or not. We call this totalitarianism. Out of all these proposed changes, the DPK made deleting freedom from the Constitution its party platform in 2018. They withdrew their efforts to change the Constitution only after they faced opposition. Then they bided for time. And now they're again trying to change the Constitution to change the fundamental nature of the freedom-based republic. But less obviously this time, by being quiet about the content. Since what they're trying to change is not widely known, it is more difficult to find what these changes are. But the one that keeps emerging is adding violent events into the Constitution. But they label these violent events democracy movement. They likely have other changes, but one thing is clear. They're trying to change the Constitution quickly. They're trying to pass a law currently to have a referendum to change the Constitution in the upcoming elections, which is a little over a month away, on June 3rd, 2026, and in early voting of May 29th and 30th, nationwide regional elections will be held in South Korea. These are elections for provincial governors and mayors at the city, county, and district levels, legislators at the city, county, and district levels, and education superintendents at the city, county, and district levels. So these elections are significant and involves a large number of elected officials. And surprisingly, Chinese citizens who are green card holders, who have lived in South Korea for 3 years, they can vote in the regional elections. Once these Chinese citizens register to vote, they can vote in Korean regional elections even if they live in China. Korean elections, especially since the April 2020 elections, have been mired in election fraud controversies, such as more ballots than registered voters, stacks of pristine and unfolded ballots found in piles and ballot containers, and 3,170 votes in a row going towards one candidate. That's by a ballot counting machine. So the DPK and the Lee Jae-myung administration want to add the referendum to change the Constitution to coincide with the June 3rd elections. Meanwhile, the controversy over the problems with the processes and methods of elections have not been resolved. The massive number of Koreans who have been protesting, they hold up the ROK and US flags. They're against CCP influence. They're against those in power who are steering the country towards socialism. So these people who are protesting against that are concerned. They do not want their country to become communist. They do not want the socialist agenda to be reflected in their constitution. Again, the DPRK and the like-minded parties want to change the constitution and to do this quickly. One item that would be added to the constitution, which surfaced recently, is so-called 518. The political parties pursuing socialist agenda want to put this 518, which is a violent event, in the constitution. 518 was an incident which occurred on dates that included May 18th. So that's where 518 comes from. May 18th, 1980 in Gwangju. It's often referred to as the Gwangju Uprising in English, and in Korean, simply 518. This is very controversial in South Korea. Those in power now label this a democracy movement, while others call it a riot or a rebellion, which was what it was initially called. And this leads to my next topic, suppression of freedom of speech. Several years ago, the National Assembly, which is Korea's version of US Congress, passed the 518 History Distortion Law that allows the government to punish people up to 5 years imprisonment and fines for calling it a riot or saying that North Korea was involved. In fact, they already put a Vietnam War veteran in prison for 2 years. He was a researcher of the 518 issue. That was Dr. Ji Man-won, and he was in his 80s. Now they're investigating a youth. And one of the questions they asked him during an investigation was, why do you not call 518 a democracy movement? Why would they try to silence people from saying anything other than the DPRK and its supporters' narrative, even passing a law to imprison people? Further, why is it so important to rush and put that in the Constitution? Another issue that gets censored is criticism of communist China. More than 80% and 90% in some surveys of South Koreans do not like China, especially after they realize that Chinese influence on domestic politics is so prevalent in South Korea. Banners that criticize the Chinese Communist Party or calls for an investigation into election fraud are labeled as hate speech. And afterwards, they get investigated just as they do in the PRC. At an anti-CCP rally in Korea in October 2025, Korean youth tore up a flag of Communist China. And immediately they were investigated by the police. But when an anti-US group tore up a US flag in front of the US embassy in Seoul, nothing happened to them. No investigations. So this is prejudicial. Yet another topic that gets censored is election fraud. The National Election Commission, or NEC, even tried to push for a law to punish people who raise concerns about the election fraud. This was revealed in late December 2024. On May 14th, 2025, less than 3 weeks away from the presidential elections, the platform X-Korea suspended the account of a presidential candidate, Hwang Kyo-an, who has been calling for election integrity. On April 16th, 2026, so earlier this month, Jeon Han-gil, he's a history lecturer and a YouTube political commentator. He was handcuffed and taken in by the police. And the reason was defamation of politicians, which included Lee Jae-myung. But he was not even charged with anything. and the police did not have an arrest warrant. Yet this was done to him. In January 2025, DPK lawmaker John Yonggi stated publicly that the DPK will absolutely charge or file charges with the police against anyone who posts comments that they don't like on social media. When the DPK files complaints, the police then take action by starting an investigation. What are the topics that the DPK doesn't approve of? Election fraud issues, such as when someone posts 196-year-old voted, and that's based on the National Election Commission data. Or when people say China interfered in the elections. Or when people write North Korea interfered in the elections. The DPK urges people to report them to the so-called DPK police station, which is not a real police station, but a website under the heading jail. This sounds more like North Korea and the PRC, but this is occurring in South Korea. To help understand the scope of the problem, it's useful to point out that the major media in South Korea do not report in the news on these massive rallies where people call out for defending South Korea. They call for a strong alliance with the United States because that stands for freedom. They call out CCP out, or for the government to investigate election fraud. So what people do is they share this on social media. And the social media, so YouTube, which is under Google Korea, X Korea, Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and so on. So postings on these are then subsequently censored, as if copying the censorship practices of the PRC. Under the Lee Jae-myung administration, pastors have been jailed. This is even before any trial. Pastor Sonyeon Bo was arrested and jailed in September 2025. Pastor Son, who organized national prayer rallies against the political tyranny of the pro-CCP, pro-communist factions, was jailed for inviting a conservative education superintendent candidate to his church to speak. They called it a violation of the election law. He faced over 20 lawsuits, many of them filed primarily by the controversial and above-the-law National Election Commission. His church was raided. He was released eventually due to international pressure. In another case, Pastor Jun Kwang-hun was arrested and jailed earlier this year on January 22nd. He also led prayers and peaceful rallies where people held the ROK and US flags to show support for a strong US-ROK alliance and to hold elected officials accountable. This was held at the Gwanghamun, which is a large public square in Seoul. His church had also been raided multiple times, and his church members were physically attacked during the Moon Jae-in administration. Pastor Jun was released on bail and under various restrictions earlier this month. These are the same tactics that the PRC used against Hong Kong citizens who protest against communism in Hong Kong. Jimmy Lai, owner of the Apple Daily in Hong Kong, faced similar persecution from the CCP prior to eventually being arrested, prosecuted, and jailed for speaking out. Another pastor in Gwangju was fined in 2024 because he expressed his concern about Lee Jae-myung pursuing communist policies and the dominance of Juche ideologists, or we can call them Kim Il-sungists, in South Korean politics. He said, if the DPK wins, they'll jail us. He's not wrong. What do all these cases have in common? These pastors oppose South Korea turning communist and orienting the country toward communist China and communist North Korea. And for expressing that view, they're harassed, jailed, and fined. Lawfare is used in a different way as well. The DPRK recently introduced a bill to suppress freedom of religion. Churches are registered as legal entity in South Korea. Under this proposed bill, the government can revoke the approval that established a legal entity like the church. It also requires the confiscation of church property. Those who want to pass the bill state that these measures apply to churches for interfering in politics. The Korean church strongly opposes this bill, citing that it infringes upon freedom of religion, which is guaranteed by the Constitution. The bill was recently retracted, fortunately, after heavy opposition by Christians. But there's a record of these lawmakers reintroducing the same unconstitutional content in the bills over and over. As a note, the Republic of Korea is the second largest Christian country in Asia in terms of percentage of population, and that's right after the Philippines. The first ever session of the National Assembly in Korea, held in 1948, began with a prayer to God. But now, the lawmakers pursuing socialist and communist policies at the National Assembly are trying to oppress freedom of religion, and they're doing this through lawfare. It's a terrible contradiction for the institution. The Republic of Korea has been seen as a shining example of America's success story. In adopting the American-style freedom-based political and economic system, South Korea thrived. Unlike North Korea, where people lack freedom and food, South Koreans enjoyed freedom and prosperity. But that's changing. I just provided some examples of suppression of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And those in South Korea who are supportive of the communist parties of China and North Korea, and who are anti-United States, anti-Republic of Korea, and anti-Japan, are trying to change the fundamental nature of the Republic of Korea by deleting freedom from the Constitution and adding a socialist agenda into it, which would essentially turn South Korea into a satellite state of Communist China. While the anti-freedom faction has taken control over levers of power, including the government and the major media, there are South Korean patriots who are desperately fighting against this potential outcome. They don't want Korea to become like Venezuela under Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. They call for CCP out because they don't want to be a vassal state of the PRC. We should listen to them and voice support for freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O, for that. For alerting all of us to the tremendous dangers that are right now with regards to the Republic of Korea, that it's quickly evolving into the People's Republic of South Korea, as you said, a satellite state of the People's Republic of China. I mean, why any government like Lee would seek to associate itself with Xi Jinping and his monstrous policies of human rights abuses is beside me. Same way with Pyongyang. Why would you want to be more like them and not like a freedom, democracy-loving country that we all hope and pray South Korea will go back to? So with the importance of this hearing is that we need to mobilize. Your call to action, and Suzanne, Dr. Scholte, I've read her testimony, and like Banner does it as well. Perhaps all of us, the White House, I know they've expressed concerns, but it has to go to the next level. There's no doubt about that. You know, the nomination has already been put forward for a former member of the House, Michelle Park Steele, who was on the China Commission. I served with her. She'll be outstanding, but we know how slow the ratification process is, or the confirmation process is, over on the Senate side. And we have with us today Dick Sweat, who was our ambassador to the Denmark, and he knows what that's like, waiting for confirmation. Is also a U.S. Senator, and of course, Katrina Lantos Sweat, who does tremendous work on human rights, and this commission is named after her very distinguished father. So thank you for joining us today. But we need to bring more light scrutiny and a mobilization on our side diplomatically to try to stop this erosion of human rights and democracy in South Korea. So your call to action was extraordinarily effective. I'd like to now recognize Dr. Scholte.
Should I repeat what? Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Congressman Smith. And I was also acknowledging Congressman McGovern, who I know is here with us in spirit, as well as Tom Lantos, who is passionate about North Korea human rights and strong advocate for human rights all over the world. I thank you for having this hearing during North Korea Freedom Week. And I can state emphatically that we are facing the most challenging time in the history of the North Korea human rights movement since we first hosted defectors on Capitol Hill in the 1990s. There are two reasons for this. First, we failed for decades to listen to the voices of those who understand the Kim family dictatorship better than any of us, those who have escaped. When North Korea's highest-ranking defector, Hwang Jong-yap, defected in 1997, he said North Korea will never give up its nuclear weapons, and the dictatorship only cares about its own survival, not its citizens. But Hwang said, and thousands of North Koreans who have escaped since, the regime has an Achilles heel, human rights. When North Koreans understand they were not born to be the slaves of the Kim family, but were born with God-given rights of freedom, changes. Second, we now have an administration, as Taro has very eloquently talked about, in South Korea that has abandoned its constitutional obligations in multiple ways to ensure the Kim dictatorship continues. It is such a grave time for us right now that we have painfully joked that as we mark the 23rd annual North Korea Freedom Week, will we need now to establish a South Korea Freedom Week? No one on earth has a greater moral and constitutional responsibility than the President of the Republic of Korea, Lee Jae-myung, to uphold the rights of the Korean people, whether born north or south of the DMZ. President Lee has abandoned the people of North Korea and deprived his own citizens in South Korea of their constitutional rights. The Lantos Human Rights Commission held a hearing in 2021 because of grave concerns of the state of civil and political rights during the Moon Jae-in administration, but the situation today under the Lee administration is even worse. For the first time, the ROK has ended all radio broadcasting to North Korea and all support for defector-led organizations. It is vigorously enforcing an anti-leafleting law that was declared unconstitutional, thereby depriving its own citizens of the rights they have under the ROK's Constitution and its treaty obligations as signatories to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. I'm going to quote now from the testimonies submitted by the defectors participating in North Korea Freedom Week to underscore these points. First, Ha Kwan-il, chairman of the North Korea Democratization Committee. The Lee administration is prioritizing de-escalation and peaceful coexistence over the freedom and human rights of the North Korean people. But true peace on the Korean Peninsula cannot be achieved while turning away from the freedom and human rights of the North Korean people. He expresses deep concern that punishment against those who seek to send information to North Korea has intensified, and that the Ministry of Unification is even changing the term used to describe North Korean defectors to weaken its meaning. The Republic of Korea now stands at an important crossroads. This is the moment to decide whether it will stand firmly on the principles of liberal democracy or whether it will weaken the value of freedom through compromise and appeasement toward the North Korean dictatorship. Stability and peace on the Korean Peninsula can never be realized so long as Kim Jong-un's nuclear weapons, missiles, and politics of terror remain in place. True peace is possible not through silence and submission, but only through the foundation of freedom, human rights, truth, and principle. Today, as one of the North Korean defectors who risked his life to find freedom, I say this clearly. North Korean defectors are people who know better than anyone the value of freedom. We are prepared to risk our lives, again, in order to defend the freedom we risked our lives to obtain. I urge the United States, which has led the free world, to provide political, diplomatic, and moral support so that defector-led organizations can bring freedom to their homeland. Last September, we lost our dear partner, Kim Sung-min, who founded Free North Korea Radio, but I'm proud to introduce testimony from the woman he named to lead this award-winning radio station. I joke she's my new boss, Kim Ji-young, the president of Free North Korea Radio. I was 13 years old when I first secretly listened to an outside radio broadcast. In North Korea, listening to foreign broadcasts is not simply an illegal act, it is a dangerous choice. And yet, I listened because there was truth in those broadcasts, truth that could never be heard in North Korea. There were stories of a world in which human beings could live with dignity, a society in which people could speak freely, the possibility that one could change one's future through effort, and the idea of human dignity. That small voice coming through the radio was not merely information, it was the first window through which I encountered freedom and hope. My life changed. The most powerful force that can change North Korea is not military force, but information. Information changes people, and change people ultimately change society. I am living proof of that. What the North Korean regime fears most is not guns or sanctions. It is outside information. Peace is not built on silence, but on truth, freedom, and the people's right to know. I'm also submitting testimony from the North Korean defector most associated with the balloon launches, Park Sung-hak, the head of Fighters for a Free North Korea. For many years, I've carried out leaflet operations to expose the reality of the Kim family's hereditary dictatorship, to tell North Koreans about the reality of South Korea, where freedom, human rights, democracy, and public welfare are alive. For over 20 years, I have sent tens of millions of leaflets so North Koreans residents learn the realities and truth of the outside world, which the Kim regime regards as a grave threat. On June 16, 2020, when North Korea blew up the Inter-Korean Liaison Office in Kaesong, it cited anti-North Korean leaflets as one of its justifications. I myself have been the target of death threats, which shows the North Korean regime genuinely fears truth. A system built on dictatorship and totalitarianism, violence, and rule by fear can never endure forever. The people of North Korea long for freedom, even in silence. I urge the U.S. Congress and the international community to stand with the North Korean people. In addition to financing the broadcast of Free North Korea Radio, my foundation, the Defense Forum Foundation, launched another project following the same model as FNKR, 100% financed by freedom-loving people, 100% conducted by North Korean defectors, called Operation Truth. Our goal was to reach the people of North Korea by land, by sea, and by air. I'm pleased to submit testimony from Ba Kwan-min of Free North Korea Radio, who's been leading these efforts. Operation Truth is not simply an effort to send material goods. It's an effort to deliver truth, hope, food, and the gospel to people isolated under the North Korean regime's extreme blockade on information. The items delivered include rice, Bibles, USB drives, leaflets, radios, medicine, and even US $1 bills. By sea, rice bottles or containers are sent adrift on the currents. By air, leaflets and digital storage devices are sent by balloon. Gangwon Island has been one of the representative locations where such operations have been conducted on a continuing basis. I came to feel the meaning of this work even more deeply when I heard the story of Kim I-kyok, who defected with his family across the Yellow Sea in May 2023. Kim and his wife said they had found the rice bottles since childhood. In school, they were taught that these were propaganda materials sent by bad reactionaries. But to them, the rice bottles felt like proof that someone had not forgotten them, a symbol of hope, like a gift sent from heaven. As adults, they said those rice bottles were a clear sign the outside world had not forgotten us. The Lee administration has taken draconian measures to stop these deliveries by dispatching police officers to the sites of launches and labeling them danger zones, giving promotions to police who catch people trying to carry out Operation Truth, and by providing rewards to citizens who turn people in. This sounds a lot like North Korea. Bridge inspections, patrols, and surveillance activities have all been strengthened. According to Bae, the people of North Korea cannot speak freely, cannot listen freely, and cannot know freely. Operation Truth delivers them truth and hope and breaks down North Korea's lies and oppression to prepare the way for a free future. Finally, I am submitting information from Chae Jung-han, commander of the North Korean People's Liberation Front, regarding the urgent situation facing 2 North Koreans who are now POWs in Ukraine. According to Choi, North Korean troops were sent to the front under extremely closed and coercive system, having been subjected to intense ideological control. Testimony from the Ukrainian side indicates that these soldiers charged forward in battle without retreat, even under severe danger, resulting in devastating casualties. Some reports estimate that the number of North Korean troops killed or wounded has exceeded 7,000. As a former North Korean soldier and as someone who has personally experienced the North Korean system, I must state clearly that these 2 young men must not be sent back to North Korea, where punishment and retaliation await them. I respectfully urge the U.S. Congress and the international community to play a responsible role so that they may begin new lives in an environment where freedom and safety are guaranteed. Choi hopes that these POWs can be treated humanely, citing the Geneva Convention, as their fate, if returned to North Korea, is certain torture and death, especially as they've expressed the desire to resettle in South Korea. I also note the news I just heard this morning that it's now been confirmed that Kim Jong-un has ordered that any North Korean troops that are caught and become POWs are ordered to commit suicide. The North Koreans' greatest advocate should be their president, who under the Republic of Korea Constitution is Lee Jae-myung. In the history of the North Korea human rights movement, we have come from the ignorance and indifference of the late 1990s and early 2000s, when people simply did not first believe the horrific stories being told by the first escapees. And today, now we've come to the point, and today we have open hostility to their plight. All through my years of working on North Korea human rights and working for as their advocate, I have always had someone, until Lee Jae-myung became president, that I could call at the embassy of the ROK if a North Korean was in danger. Working with the ROK, I was able to rescue hundreds, including, since the COVID pandemic, a family of 4 detained in China in danger of repatriation, 2 women who were victims of trafficking, and 8 fishermen detained in Russia, one of whom is here with us today, Chae Jung-hyuk. The ROK has done amazing and impressive work, helping rescue and resettle close to 40,000 North Korean refugees. We implore the ROK to become an advocate once again for those born north of the DMZ and to restore the constitutional rights of all those living south of the DMZ. The theme of this year's North Korea Freedom Week is truth. We'll set them free, and North Koreans are leading the way. I thank the U.S. Congress for always showing bipartisan concern for the North Korean people, and hope this hearing will raise the conscience of the Lee administration to invest in our greatest resource, North Korean escapees, to help bring freedom to their homeland and peaceful unification. I'm going to close with a poem by Kim Sung-min, the founder of Free North Korea Radio, whose desire in life was to become a poet, but instead he became a freedom advocate. But before he died, his poetry book was published, Memoirs of a Soldier, and this was published just before he died. And I want to read one poem, a brief poem entitled Freedom. Though it is mine by right, it was never ours from birth. Not a thing sold in any market, yet taken from our parents. Without it, we may breathe, but we are already dead. Freedom, breath itself, the worth of being, it is our vow to carry it back to our homeland. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Scholte, thank you so very much as well. And as I said at the beginning, you have been a force for human rights and democracy for North Koreans, but also when the backsliding began several years ago and again now. And we are this commission deeply indebted to that leadership, because you have brought witnesses in the past before our commission and my subcommittee on human rights. I'll never forget women who were trafficked, went into China, was trafficked. The mother of the one woman the daughter who was trafficked, went looking to help her with her other daughter, and all three were trafficked. And you helped them and then brought them here for Congress to hear that amazing story of courage and tenacity, perseverance under the most extreme situation. And there we had these now liberated women who were in South Korea. So if the welcome mat is being shredded by the Lee presidency, that needs to be called out as never before. And again, as I said a moment ago, I don't know how anyone on this earth wants to emulate Xi Jinping. I was the author of the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which we introduced in 2014 during the Umbrella Revolution. And all the China experts here in town said Xi Jinping will never, ever do that to Hong Kong, because that's an area where he makes huge amounts of money. And of course, we said, yes, he will. He'll suppress Jimmy Lai. You mentioned, Dr. Rowe, Jimmy Lai, who is a tremendous champion of human rights. He ought to get the Nobel Peace Prize. And our China Commission members, we've all signed a letter asking for that. He certainly is deserving. And we've had Claire, but also Sebastian testify, his children, at hearings, and they are just, chips off the old block. They're just amazing. And yet now we see South Korea voluntarily and foolishly cascading towards and evolving into another potential Hong Kong client state of Beijing. It's ridiculous, frankly. So just a couple of questions, if I could. We talked, Dr. O, about the Chinese green card individuals who, if you have any sense of as to how many people we're talking about and their ability to vote. Is it part of a strategy of the CCP to send in these people to take it over, to tip elections? I'm very aware that even in Tibet, part of their plan there was to send in Han Chinese to displace the indigenous Tibetans, the Buddhists, and it's that transfer, which has been called out by so many over the years. Rabia Kadir just came in, who's another great human rights leader. I would just say, do you see parallels there, that this is part of a strategy by Xi Jinping? And when you talk about election fraud, it happens everywhere, all over the world. But most places, it's either majoring in it or minoring in it. Do they do it in mass numbers to absolutely tip elections? I had it happen in my own election 45 years ago when 2,000 dead people voted against me in the city of Trenton. How did we know? The number of people who voted versus how many were on the rolls in precinct after precinct after precinct. There were maybe 450 people registered, 510 voted. And it was a pattern, and I could not get anybody to bring action to stop that, to hold people to account. But we had all those names excised from the rolls as a matter of they're dead. How could they be voting? So it happens everywhere. But to think that South Korea, is embracing policies that would enable that kind of fraud to produce an election result is outrageous. They're our friend and ally. We love the South Korean people, but we hate it if the government is becoming now a tool of Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un, which it seems he is in a fast track to do just that. So if you could speak to the opposition, how well organized are they? Are they raising issues in a meaningful way? If I could also ask you, too, with regards to our own mission in Seoul, have they raised their voices about this? I know the administration has at times, including in this year, raised concerns, but there is a focus on Iran, there's a focus on other places, and we don't want the people of South Korea to be, for their concerns to be obscured by what's happening everywhere else. I will lead a letter to our Secretary of State and to the President, highlighting your testimonies, giving them the testimonies in total, but also highlighting it so they will read it, because there needs to be something done immediately or else we're going to lose South Korea to the Communist Party. That will be catastrophic in the extreme. So, and human rights, Andrew Natsios testified at one of my hearings, our former USAID administrator, and he said when we were doing the nuclear talks, he was shocked how the human rights issue just fell off the table, just wouldn't be discussed. It should have been front and center the whole time for the sake of the people of North Korea. So, just as some of the opening questions that I have. And finally, if you could speak to the special envoy. As far as I know, nobody has been named for that. We do know that the ambassador at large for North Korea. We know Richard Grinnell does do a special envoy for several missions. It's not clear how much of that includes North Korea, but you might speak to how well or poorly is the Trump administration responding to this challenge.
Okay, that was quite a list of questions. I will start with how many Chinese. I'll have to get the precise number, but currently there are about 800,000 Chinese living in South Korea. And of course, not every one of them can vote. But so it would be, if we say 50% or even 30%, it would be around that number. But it's not just how many of them. Earlier this year, they actually passed a law or changed the, administrative procedure where they allow visa-free entry for Chinese tourists. Of course, tourists don't usually go to another country to vote, but there's no mechanism to sort of stop them because if their names or some names are registered to vote, they can vote without an ID verification. So the whole thing is sort of set up for them to be able to vote if they want to. And they're expecting about 1 million Chinese tourists to come in. So we have that situation. In the presidential election and the general election last year, which is, so the Chinese cannot vote in that election. But interestingly, many of the DPRK lawmakers or candidates, they campaigned in Chinese language in Seoul, in China, in neighborhoods where there are a lot of Chinese. They can't vote, yet they were campaigning in Chinese in that neighborhood, which was odd. And the other question about how well is the opposition organized? Well, first of all, there is opposition, for sure. All those rallies that were held, not all, but many of them that were held, these are really large rallies. I know that the other side, they like to say, oh, either they stay silent about these rallies, like there are none, or they say, oh, it's a few hundred, when it's more like hundreds of thousands of people. So, and when they're out there, they call for election fraud investigation. So in terms of the number of people, it's pretty high. But here's the situation. The National Election Commission is chaired by a sitting Supreme Court justice. And they rotate like every 6 months. And that's at the national level. The National Election Commission has branches at the various levels, at the province, city, districts. And so at those levels, they also have National Election Commission's branches. And those commissions are also headed by local judges, sitting judges. So what this does is it creates a situation where they cannot be investigated because judges will not grant a search warrant. So if the entity is, let's say prosecutors, if they're going to investigate them, then they'll need they need evidence. They need to gather evidence by doing search and seizure, but they cannot get the warrant to do it. And they are just extremely powerful, and they're able to jail people, harass people, fine people in current situation. That's why earlier I said above the law National Election Commission. For some reason, it's above the law. When there were over 1,000 cases of nepotism at the National Election Commission, well, they didn't want to be, well, they were hacked by North Korea, and they said, oh, we cannot be hacked. This is while they used password 12345. And people wanted them to be investigated, and they refused. all they have to do is refuse. I don't want to be investigated, and nobody can investigate them for some reason. So that's why I said they're above the law. So it's very difficult to fight an entity like that. And of course, I think they're backed by a very powerful force. So we have that situation. How prevalent is this election fraud situation? What I mentioned is just a tip of the iceberg. There's so many evidence. It's just that they're not investigating. They're not being heard. But there were election monitors who videotaped, who were there, who noticed all these. There was a situation where in this one district where they were forced to recount the votes because the election monitor demanded it. And when they recounted the votes, it flipped the results. And the numbers were totally different. So this is what's happening in South Korea. Again, people continue to fight for it, but it's just that the national election and that side is much, much stronger, and they hold the levers of power. But they also do not want to be exposed. So I think when we call them out, that really makes them nervous.
Dr. Scholte? Thank you.
I'll speak to the question about the Trump administration. Yeah. I think Michelle Steele's going to be outstanding. I think that's a brilliant choice that the Trump administration made. But my personal hope is that the Trump administration will return to their very strong advocacy on North Korean human rights that was part of the first years of his administration, where he gave the best speech of any American president or South Korean president about what was happening in North Korea, the horrors that were happening. He did it before the Korean Assembly. He went through the whole laundry list, from the trafficking to the political prison camps. And that was just such a powerful speech. And I hope that they'll return to being strong advocates once again for North Korea human rights as he was. And I realize right now, I think there's a hope, that this is at least the rumor, that he may be wanting to have another summit with Kim Jong-un, and that's why they're downplaying for human rights. For example, they haven't issued a statement, maybe they will this afternoon, recognizing the North Korea Freedom Week, and every single president of the United States since we started North Korea Freedom Week has recognized North Korea Freedom Week since we started, and the Trump administration in his first term also recognized it, but last year was the first time there nada on North Korea Freedom Week. So I think that might be because they want to have a meeting with Kim Jong-un, and which I think would be a waste of time and disastrous to image-wise. And I want to just underscore it. They've got to recognize, I know North Korea is kind of treated as a second-tier issue with everything else going on in the world, and I know there's a lot of really serious stuff going on in the world, but let's just remember the links here. When Hamas attacked Israel, 2 days after that, China sent back the largest number of North Korean refugees they were repatriated 2 days after Hamas attacked Israel. Less than 2 weeks after Hamas attacked Israel, there were demonstrations going on in the West Front with young Palestinians carrying pictures of Xi Jinping, Putin, and Kim Jong-un. It's like, how did they get organized that quickly? We have to recognize the really strong links between all the bad actors in the world with North Korea, and how much North Korea is involved in the horrors that are going on, in helping the Iranian regime, and in helping Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So I think that rather than not really addressing it, understand it should be addressed very forcefully right now. So that would be, my hope is that they would return to being strong advocates on human rights, and they would recognize that how much this evil regime in North Korea is helping all the evil perpetrators that we're trying to address currently. So that would be my comment on that.
If I can follow up on that, on the ambassador designate Michelle Steele situation. In Korea, again, the DPRK and that side, they're trying to sabotage that. So there's already a movement, and Korean media, major media like MBC and JTBC, they're already spreading lies about this. There is a relatively new organization called KIPEC, Korea Interparliamentary Exchange Center. In Korean, they actually use the word Korea-US, and it makes it sound like it's actually lawmakers of both the United States and South Korea working together for common purpose. That's what the organization sounds like in Korean language. But again, in English, the US is missing. Well, it turns out that this is a lobbying organization that National Assembly in South Korea created because the website claims that it is registered under FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act. And a whole bunch of them left yesterday to come to the United States with, under this umbrella. And there are several possible items that they may want to influence. And I think one of them is regarding Ambassador Designate Michelle Steele. The other one is Coupang, which is an American company that is it's like an Amazon in Korea, and they were discriminating against an American company in favor of Chinese companies like Temu and Alibaba. So that may be another, because 50 US lawmakers signed a letter recently, delivered that to Korea, saying don't discriminate against US companies. So that's another issue. And the other one is an ongoing thing. They have tried to get the US to pass the end of war declaration, which sounds good on paper. Oh yeah, everyone wants to end the war, or everyone wants peace, but that's not what that really is. The implication is basically ending the alliance and removing the United Nations command. So, which makes it really, which would make the PRC, the Communist China and North Korea very happy. So those three might be the issues why they're coming to the United States.
Thank you. Dr. Rowe, in your testimony, you talked about the pastor in 2022. He was arrested for expressing concern about Lee's communist policies, but also the dominance of the Juche ideologists, which, as I understand it, I've read a book about it. Doesn't make me an expert, but it's all about the deification of the Kim dynasty and also this exaggerated self-reliance. But the deification of the Kim dynasty is really intertwined in all of it. Could you elaborate on that in terms of that pastor? What was he trying to expose, if you will, and what is South Korea doing to advance that? We know he's pushing, Lee is pushing for a communist model, but is he also pushing Juche?
So talk about the Juche. In the 1980s, there were students on college campuses. They basically revered Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, so Kim Jong-un's father and grandfather. They wanted socialism, but they also wanted to look towards North Korea to turn entire South Korea into a socialist country. That was they were willing to use violence, but that was their ideology. And that kind of ideology was very fashionable on college campuses. And they would go to each other and would listen to broadcasts from North Korea secretly, because it's illegal. And their greetings would be, hey, did you hear the broadcast? This broadcast, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il. And they would basically praise Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. And so that group, and they did a lot of violent demonstrations against the government at that time, in the 1980s. Those people are now in power. They are in the government. In fact, they were under Moon Jae-in. One person that really stands out is Im Jong-seok, who was the chief of staff to Moon Jae-in. And he, although he's chief of staff, he was above the defense minister. He would go to DMZ in military uniform, in sunglasses, and all these generals would be around him, giving him briefings, and he would be pointing like that. Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il point as if he's the leader of as if he's the commander-in-chief. But so a lot of them are in power. Of course, it's not just them. There are other people who are pursuing socialism and communism, who are not necessarily adherents of Kim Il-sung-ism, not Juche ideologists, but so there are actually fractions within that side. There are those who look more towards North Korea, and there are those who look more towards PRC. So we have that situation, and that's something that I think we should highlight as well. So a lot of these Juche ideologists and other socialists are in power. In fact, the Democratic Party of Korea attended the 100th, was it 50th? No, 50th anniversary of the communist CCP celebrating their birth. It was only the communist parties around the world were invited, but DPK was also invited. And the representative of the DPK, Democratic Party of Korea, actually gave a keynote speech, and she often talks about public ownership of property, the concept of public ownership of property, because in communism and socialism, they don't allow private property rights. So again, they are pushing for these kind of concepts, no private property, government, handing out all kinds of welfare payments, which Lee Jae-myung is doing right now, and increasing the government spending dramatically to the point where the IMF is warning South Korea, because South Korea went through this crisis back in 1997, 1998. So that's what's occurring. Let's see. So there are various other policies that lead the pastor to say, hey, he's pursuing communist policies. But again, they usually involve suppressing various freedoms. They involve getting rid of or reducing the private property rights, which is sure sign of socialism and communism.
Can I just ask you, you point out in your testimony, and I've been to Korea, and I've been to many of the churches there. They are robust. They have a passion for God, for Jesus, the Christian churches. You point out that it's the second largest Christian country in Asia in terms of percentage of population, right after the Philippines, in your testimony. And I'm wondering, and that now the Assembly is trying to oppress the church with lawfare. Could you elaborate on how well or poorly the churches, the faith community, is mobilizing to expose where Korea is heading? I remember reading Solzhenitsyn's books, and one of the things, my first trip to the Soviet Union was in '82 on behalf of Soviet Jews. And what an eye-opener that was to see how much they hated Jews. They hated Christians too, but they hated Jews and they hated Muslims. I went to one museum on atheism in Leningrad, as it was called then, in Kazan Cathedral. And in each one of as we walked around with some folks from the National Conference on Soviet Jewry, and there were all these little kids there being told what a farce religion was, all three of the major religions of the world. And, Rabia Kadiyah is here, who's one of the great human rights activists for the Uyghurs, and has suffered horribly. Mm-hmm. Obviously, Xi Jinping is committing genocide as we meet here, and not enough is ever mentioned about that or talked about that. And he did the same thing, and it's an ongoing genocide against Tibetan Buddhists. And he's doing it against the Christians now in terms of Sinization, where he's suppressing the Christian faith, reminiscent of Mao Zedong himself, just co-opt it or destroy him. And don't the South Korean, hopefully the South Korean church sees that they're on a glide path to either being totally co-opted or destroyed if the Chinese Communist Party model takes hold, which Lee certainly wants to do.
Thank you for that question. So the ones I mentioned, they're definitely mobilized to fight this, but unfortunately, the Korean Christian churches are split in that there are those who support the current regime in South Korea. And
you know which ones? Could you name them?
I don't know specifically, but I can actually find out. I can find out.
And also, whether or not the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church, all the, some of them do understand profoundly what communism will do to them.
Yes. So the Catholic Church, unlike the Catholic Church in the United States, in Korea, Catholic Church has long been infiltrated by the communists. I've done a lot of research into this, so I know it actually goes back to, I would say, 70s, probably earlier than that too. But in the 70s, there was a group, Revolutionary Unification Party, and they wanted to infiltrate various segments of the society. And so one of them was, one of the targets was the church. And they used the name Christian, they used the name church, but what they do is they use that to recruit people who really haven't studied the religion, haven't studied Christianity, using very sweet-sounding words, and then recruit them, and then create a parallel organization. So it's not sanctioned by the church, but it's a different organization. But because they wear the two hats at the same time, it confuses people. They don't know. They think it's part of the church. And then they mislead them into violent demonstrations and other activities. So there are some of those. And then there are some of the pastors who have been to North Korea. They also get threatened or co-opted because they use, basically they use women who are able to quickly get pregnant, basically. They send them to their hotel rooms, and if they don't let them in, these women will say, I'll get punished if you reject me. And some of them have families. And the reason why that was exposed is because there was a Korean-American pastor in LA who went to North Korea to help, do some humanitarian work. He was put into that situation. They had a video, they threatened him, and he was supposed to act according to whatever they told him, but he used his conscience. He came out and he basically exposed it. He resigned, but he exposed it, and that's why we know. So there are certain situations like that as well.
I was just going to make one comment about Juche, because since you brought it up. Yeah, understanding this regime, it's so important to understand Juche, because it is a religion, and we actually have a online prayer thing going on tonight with Dr. Thomas Belke, who is the one that
I read his book.
Yes, that's the book you're talking about, because he's a brilliant guy, but he said we can't really understand, negotiating with North Korea unless you understand that Juche is a religion, and that's why they are so against all these other religions, because Juche is the worship of the dictator, and it's modeled after Christianity, and it infuriates me because they took all the tenets of Christianity. My personal view is that Kim Il-sung, having been grown up in a Christian family and lived under the Japanese, he saw that it was the Christians that were most pushing back against the Japanese during the Japanese colonization period. And it's a fact that half the signers of the Korean Declaration of Independence were Christians. And so I think he saw the power of the Christian faith, so he decided to make up one on his own, and he took everything. And but it's very important for people to understand that. They've got the Trinity. Kim Il-sung is God, Kim Jong-il was the Christ, and Juche was the Holy Spirit. But they also took all of our parables and all of our the Ten Commandments, and this was really brought home to me recently. I hope Kim Jong-un doesn't mind me telling this story, but I was trying to explain to her the gospel message because she's going to be leading Free North Korea Radio, and since we do a gospel program, and I thought, well, I'll illustrate this. I think I might have it here in my purse. I had a little sheep, and I pulled out this little sheep, and I said, God is the shepherd, and the 99 sheep go astray, but God will go after that one sheep. And I was trying to tell her the gospel message, and I was going to hand her this sheep, and she goes, oh, I know that story. The 99 Korean Workers' Party members. And I was like, oh, no. He took the parables, too, and they twisted that. So it is a complete perversion of the Christian faith, and that's why this is such a demonic regime. And when we think about how the horrors that are happening in North Korea, this is demonic. It's pure evil. And Pyongyang used to be the Oriental Jerusalem. There was an incredible 1907 revival of the Christian faith in Pyongyang. But that's why they're suffering so much, because this is a demonic regime. So I just wanted to point that out about Juche.
Thank you. You know, I did read Thomas Belkey's book. It's called Juche, A Christian Study of North Korea's State Religion 20 years ago. And I have shared it with the Pentagon people. I've shared it with State Department people. Is that when you negotiate, when you're dealing with the fanaticism that their military could express and show in a war, understand what's at the core of so much of this, and it's Juche. And I often get blank stares. So we need to, you know, Belkey's got to get more people to read his book. So thank you. I'm glad you're having him at your conference. One final question, and anything else before we close. We know that the Lee government is disbanding the Ministry of Unification's Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs Office, and they're withholding its annual North Korean human rights report from public release. What is the significance of that? Is the report likely to be accurate, or is it just a nothing burger in terms of what's in it, because they have no interest in really investigating human rights abuses?
The annual report, the human rights report that they used to do.
Yeah, used to do.
We can probably both comment about that. I'll just make it really make it quickly. It's huge that they've stopped reporting on this. It's huge, especially because there was a dearth of information because of COVID, because Kim Jong-un used COVID to stop the information campaign. We were winning the war on information because people in North Korea are so much more knowledgeable. And now the young people and the adults now are the people that were part of the Jangmangdang generation who saw their mothers create the market system. So they're not easily manipulated and lied to by the regime. In fact, I would say that the people are far more knowledgeable, and they are just doing what they need to do to survive. So we were winning the information campaign, and then COVID happened, and then Kim Jong-un used it to shut the border down. But the dearth of information means that all the people are escaping now, and the information that was being gathered, the administration, Yoon government, was passionate about collecting all the evidence it could get, getting the information out there. We just clung to those reports. They were so important, and now they've stopped that reporting. So it's huge. It's a huge blow to the advancement of North Korea human rights, but also in North Koreans understanding that their testimonies are being listened to. So it's very very discouraging. In fact, we did in meetings we've had recently, we've asked our government to do more on reporting to kind of pick up the slack on that.
So it's regarding the State Department's annual human rights report by country? Is it? Would you mind?
The ROKs. Oh, you were talking about the ROK. I'm sorry. You're talking about ROK's reporting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
they're not reporting anymore. The significance of that, what would you say is it?
I agree with Suzanne. They are basically stopping everything that's related to protecting and supporting human rights in North Korea. But then, they're also violating human rights within South Korea. So I guess they would not want that exposed. I mean, they are very friendly to North Korean regime as well as the PRC regime. I just want to add a little bit, an anecdote that I didn't add, because earlier it seems like everything sounds so dark. There was a former Marxist who told me that his organization told him to infiltrate the church as a pastor. So he went in, he infiltrated, but the result was that he became a Christian. So we have situations like that as well. And in Korea, again, there are a lot of Christian groups who are praying. I went to this one church where they had 24-hour prayers at the church. It's constantly for years because of the situation. So again, it's not the entire Christian community. There's some split, but there are enough people who are praying and who are trying to save the country.
The mention of what goes on in China, and I've met with the head of the Patriotic Catholic Association, had a very vigorous argument with him, and as well as with the head of the Three Self movement, which is the Protestant. And what the Chinese government does, they go in, they take it over, and they rewrite the Bible. It's called synodization, and now, again, which is why I hope that the faith community that is still faithful realizes that this is an existential threat to them, to the prospering of the gospel, to their very lives, should the Chinese model be, and the North Korean model be imposed upon their citizens. Should we link human rights deterioration in South Korea with trade? I'm fighting hard. I've been doing it for years vis-a-vis the People's Republic of China. It's been a bipartisan effort back in the 80s when, unfortunately, human rights was delinked from human rights on May 26, 1994, by President Clinton. That's when we lost China, in my opinion, because then they said, all they care about is the almighty buck and dollars and profits, not human rights. It's an afterthought. But should we be looking at South Korea as a place where we should have linkage to human rights to our trade policy?
Yes, absolutely. I think so. It's because they are not separating human rights from anything else that they're doing. It's all part of a entire campaign, this whole picture. So they're going to use whatever tools that are available to them, and we should be able to use any of the national tools of national policy that we have. I think one of the so one ironic thing is that while they're so anti-United States, and when I say anti-U.S., there are members, again, in the 80s, when they were students, they threw bombs at the U.S. ambassador's residence. That's terrorism, yet they're in power now. So we have people like that, but many of them also love the United States when it comes to their children. They send they're grown children, but they send them to the United States to get education here and also to get citizenship and to live and enjoy the freedom that this country provides. So they love that part, but they're anti-U.S. Going back to earlier last year and again this year too, there were a lot of people who were posting and expressing anti-U.S. Sentiment. And so the Korean patriots, they began to report them to the various State Department and CIA and other websites. And some of them were denied visa. And all of a sudden, they were scrubbing their social media. So they care about the ability to enter this country. So I think understanding the fact that they want to be able to come to the United States at will, I think that is something that we need to understand that is very important to them. It may not be important to them to take away freedom of its citizens, but their ability to come to the United States is important to them.
I totally agree with Tara, and I was going to add one thing too. One of the things that you've been passionate about trafficking situation and trafficking of women. One of the things that we have been calling on our State Department to do is to sanction the Chinese officials that are involved in the repatriations. I mean, we sanctioned some Thai officials for the repatriation of some Uyghurs, I think about 3 or 4 months ago. And we should sanction the Chinese officials that are carrying out the repatriation of North Korean refugees. And we have to do that because that would, to me, would stop it, because China is really sensitive that they know what they're doing is wrong. They're basically complicit in murder. And I think that's a step, something easy that we can do.
Any names that you have, because we could ask the State Department to impose Magnitsky sanctions on those individuals. The more specific, the better, and I will personally convey it to the right people. You do it too, but I'll do it as well, because I agree. And I've also called on the UN repeatedly. I met with Secretary General Gutierrez, who used to be the High Commissioner for Refugees, so he certainly knows refugee policy like the back of his hand. Well, the Chinese government is a signatory to the Refugee Convention, and with impunity, they send people back to Kim who are then incarcerated and or killed, murdered, executed. So, it talked about a violation of the Refugee Convention. There it is, and they won't do it. Yeah. I've talked to the current High Commissioner at length about it and got nowhere. It's like, why do they get a buy on an international covenant with which they have signed without even a mention about what this is doing, especially to the women who are being sent back forcibly repatriated to North Korea. So
And a number of them here have experienced that horror that are sitting behind me.
finally, and you've been very gracious with your time, the apparent grooming of Kim Jun-ae, Kim's daughter, what do you make of that? Who is likely to be the successor for him? And why at his age is he even thinking of successors? Is he sick?
I'll let you take that.
I think the media overplays Kim Joo-ae becoming the heir because she is seen with him in a lot of places. He takes her around. I mean, one thing I heard is that he's sort of, it's like a shield, human shield, because she's a child and, a girl. But he actually has other children. He has a son who's older than Joo-ae by another woman. And right now I can't remember, maybe they can help me. But so he has his official wife, and his official daughter is Joo-ae. But before that, when he was in Switzerland, getting education, going to boarding school, there was a woman who took care of him, and she is during the Olympics. She also came with the wife. She also do you know Kim Joo-ae 저기 김주 말고. Okay. Well, anyway, I'll have to. 김여정 말고 그 이설주. Yeah, Lee Seolju. Lee Seolju is the name. Thank you. So she's like his mistress, and that's why when she's around, she is treated sort of equally as Lee Seolju, who is his official wife.
Right.
And so. She also, so that's the son. He has a son, older son, who is never seen or heard. They don't talk about him, but so he has that, and then he also has another child, at least one child by yet another woman, and I don't, I'm going to talk about K drama here a little bit. But in K-drama, you saw where in the period dramas where there's a court and you have the king, but you have all these women who are either the king's mother or king's wife and their families, and they vie for power. We sort of have that similar situation in North Korea where there are these women who are trying to make their children the successor. But it has not been designated yet, and just because Joo-ae is seen often does not mean that she is going to be the successor.
I just hope we can end that dictatorship and not need to find out. But this is a question that we've been talking about too with the defectors, and they're like, well, Kim Jong-un can do whatever he wants, so I guess that could happen. But yeah, I don't really know, but the answer as far as whether it's legitimate or not, but I just hope we'll never have to find out, because that sister might step in and she's wicked.
Oh, I know that. Well, thank you so very, very much. We do have a lot to do in follow-up. Thank you for your extraordinary leadership. It really makes all the difference in the world. I do hope that the White House, the State Department, I know Marco Rubio well. I think he's a very good man. I think he gets it, but he's wearing a lot of hats right now. But we can't neglect this. This has to be, we need to pivot and do so aggressively. And of course, all the lobbyists are going to do everything they can to sell a false image of the Lee presidency. They're very good at that. We need to resist that disinformation as well. So thank you. This hearing is adjourned.